All right, so this morning I was doing some reading and contemplating, and I ran into an interesting line of thought, again about relativity. I'm really disturbed by relativity. I probably could have stopped at disturbed, but relativity is really an interesting thing, and I can't quite put my finger on it. It seems to give a sense of meaning and a sense of value and a sense of place and a defining construct when in fact it's really not. So what am I saying about that? Well, this morning I thought to myself, can I answer the question, where am I? And so the obvious answer to that question at the time was, I'm in the living room. And I thought, well, is the living room really a place? It's a construct of several limitations, like there's a building around me, and the place in this building where I am, people call the living room. But I thought, if I keep scaling this up, if I keep reducing or increasing the reference point of where I am, it gets more and more difficult to tell you where I am, and actually in the end becomes impossible to know where I'm at. Because you see, any time that I come up with a piece of relative knowledge, it demands that I remain ignorant of a greater knowledge, right? If I say I'm in the living room, that seems very reasonable and very, very, very normal and very exact, until we take into account some greater issues that sort of muddy the definition, in the sense that I'm on a planet that's spinning at some tens of thousands of miles an hour. So that means my location is in constant flux, not only by the spin of this planet, by the orbit of this planet around a sun. So suddenly the idea of being in the living room, if I was trying to get someone here from Pluto, would be absolutely meaningless, because I'm never stationary. I'm never in a fixed point that I can tell or express to somebody in the greater sense of things where I'm at. Because, there's all kinds of movement involved that I can't tell you about. I could probably come up with the speed of the orbit and the speed of the spinning of the planet, but then I would have to come up with the speed of the solar system rushing out from the center of the galaxy. So if I take all of that away, and this might seem like foolish pondering, but it makes a very important point in the end. If I just place myself somewhere in the blackness of space, some intergalactic place, some point, I have no way of knowing whether I'm moving or standing still, because there would be no relative objects around me to tell me that I'm moving or that I'm standing still. There would be no friction of air or wind on me to suggest movement. So I would simply be, but I could not answer the question, where am I? Which suggests to me that I can never answer the question, where am I, unless I openly choose to become ignorant of the greater variables out there. So this is a very interesting idea to me, because it makes me understand why Ramakrishna made a distinction between spiritual knowledge and relative knowledge to M as one of his first lessons. And this idea of other questions, like, what am I? Or who am I? Also run into the same conundrums, because all relative knowledge depends on a greater ignorance. You have to ignore other conditions, other circumstances, in order to answer questions. But if we stay far enough within the ignorance, like if I just count the planet and stop there, then I can tell you where I'm at. Just like I can answer all the other questions if I put a boundary and stay ignorant of what's beyond that boundary. So this is that notion of, who am I? I am the Atman. The Atman is absolute, unchanging. It's not referential. It's an absolute. And that absolute does away with all changing definitions, which means it's not a relative piece of knowledge. It's not related to anything else. And I was playing with that idea during meditation tonight, in the sense of sitting there doing my meditation and returning to this moment. This moment also is a real conundrum. How do you define this moment, which always is, and yet seems to constantly be different? As a matter of fact, we give the moment plural, moments. But are there a plurality of moments? It seems that there's only one moment continually experienced, from changing perspectives, changing minds, changing bodies, changing worlds. And it is one of those entities that's not relative. This moment is always this moment, no matter what. This place is always here, no matter what. So the notion of here and now are two definitions of being that are fully experienceable, but cannot be defined, cannot be described. Because the more you remove the boundary, the less ability you have to describe either of those indications. So what does this mean? This means that this material existence is ignorance. It depends on ignorance to exist. You have to ignore a certain number of variables to be able to say anything about it. And that probably in the end, the sages are right. That thou art that, something that cannot be measured, something that cannot have a place in time, something that cannot have a maintainable, unchangeable boundary, something that is infinite. And so through reason, we can actually come to this notion, to this undefined, infinite, ever free, ever pure self.